So now I would like to welcome Dr. Natalie Spiteri into the call, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about more of the behavioral side of things. Before we do that, can you tell us a little bit about you, Dr. Natalie?
Thanks for having me today. My name is Dr. Spiteri, and I am a Chief Clinical Officer at Kindbridge, which I think you've heard from Dan about. And I have done a lot of work in the field. I've been in the field over 25 years, and I've worked a lot with um, developing children and young adults and how they're impacted by the world and in the world, and how they transition to be adults and use some of these digital experiences that I'm sure Dan and you have been talking about. So I do a little bit of expert work related to standards of care in the industry. I've been called upon to speak to those standards, as well as some fun projects in the entertainment industry to get some background on really having integrity and authenticity around behavioral health matters. So I'm able to contribute on that, which feels really important to make sure that we
Yeah,
get that right. And I'm also a mom of two growing teenagers. So I'm really in the thick of this topic right now. So thank you for having me, and I hope I can contribute to the conversation today.
it's a pleasure to have you, and I'm certain that you can. I am informed on your work, and I think it's phenomenal. You and I have been trying to connect for a long time just to have a chat, and this is such a spectacular topic to be having that moment. So I appreciate your presence and wanted to roll into another question for you. And this is kind of in terms of the digital reward patterns. You know, you are someone who spends a lot of time understanding how the brain works with the addiction and just looking at digital reward patterns, looking at financial risks, and behaviors that go unexamined. What do you actually think how is this impacting youth over time?
Well, Corinne, it's such a great question. And we spend a lot of time talking about intentionality. And I think the
Yeah.
more that we understand it, and frankly, our young adults understand it, and those that are still developing their brains, because the pathways and the brain, they're still developing at
Mhm.
such kind of a fast, important rate when we talk about children and our youth and our young adults, and even beyond the age of 18, our brain is still developing, right?
Yes.
And so it's really important that we understand that. We as adults understand that when we're interacting with youth, because I think sometimes we expect them to respond in ways with a full functioning brain,
Yes.
a full mature brain, and they're not there yet. But it's also really important, I think, that youth and young adults, age appropriate, can understand what's happening in their brain at these times when they are spending a lot of time on devices, in front of screens. I mean, their school and education demands, right, that they're on screens. That's kind of draws them in. They socialize, they connect with the world. All of it is kind of in their face. So I think it's important that they understand what is happening. So again, the brain is still developing, especially in the frontal part of the brain that's going to help us make decisions, make
Yeah.
long term decisions like financial decisions and how this may play out, not just today in the moment, but in my future. And
Yeah.
so I think when kind of these systems get a little hijacked by the devices, it becomes the danger zone because they're getting all of these hits of dopamine.
Uh,
Dopamine is coming every time we scroll, every time, even in young games, there's loot boxes and there's rewards and social media, the likes and the hits and
yes.
all of this stuff gives them that dopamine hit, right? And because their brain is not fully developed, it's training the brain to need more and more and more of it to
Yeah.
feel kind of that excitement, that joy. And so it becomes a perpetual pattern of like needing more, scrolling more, looking for more intensity. And that really becomes dangerous because you're training the brain to do just the opposite of some of the things we talked about before, which would be to
Yeah.
regulate to be less impulsive, to have intrinsic value. Those kinds of things are really negatively impacted, which again, later down the line can have a negative impact on financial management, things
Hmm.
like gambling addiction, sex and porn addiction, social media addiction. So a couple things, I'd like to point out is that when the brain is trained this way and it's fed with these high level dopamine hits, the reward system actually gets kind of desensitized in a way, like we were saying. So it's we need more of it. The brain
Yeah.
never gets that first hit, right? And so that leads to, it makes me think of, chasing losses,
Hmm.
chasing that first dopamine hit in a gambler, thinking I'm going to get that rush that I did from the first time. And it's such a fallacy,
Yeah.
right? And that keeps that effort to keep seeking it, right? And going after it. And that is the danger zone. Um,
You just broke down addiction so well with that explanation because I'm thinking drug addiction, I'm thinking alcohol addiction, I'm thinking cigarette, people who chain smoke. It's the same thing. It's the patterns behind the addiction that are actually feeding the
mhm.
addiction. And when you get so much, it's never really enough after that first time because the first time was the first time and you can't have that experience again. So that's very I love the way you broke that down.
It tells the brain, right, we prefer high intensity, we
Hmm.
prefer immediate reward. And frankly, I don't want to have to work that hard for the reward either, right?
Yeah.
Everybody gets a trophy, right? I'm just going to stand here. And so we have that expectation, but that's not real world, right? That's not
No,
real world experience.
no.
And I think the other impact that this kind of um, training of the brain early through these high level dopamine experiences is again what we talked about, that emotional regulation gets outsourced to the screen,
Mm.
right? It gets outsourced to the device.
Yeah.
When I'm having a bad day and I want to upregulate, I go to my device. And that could be betting, gambling, porn watching, scrolling, reeling, whatever it is that we do. So
Yeah.
that emotional regulation gets outsourced versus us going through the experience of learning how to regulate ourselves, because we use that to down regulate. Sometimes we could use it to calm, to numb, to
Hmm.
avoid the real life stressors such as whatever, school, relationships, jobs, things like that. We use it to upregulate. Maybe we're bored and we need that extra stimulation.
Yeah.
And again, we get trained to avoid the real life experiences. And so then when we have to face them, we're overwhelmed. We don't have the skill set. We're not easily moved and entertained, and we don't have the
Yeah.
resources. So I think these early experiences in the brain, again, it trains us to expect high intensity, kind of high reward. It takes us away from emotional regulation skills and development.
Yeah.
And also, I think, and this really comes closest to the topic in terms of decision making, it creates kind of this impulsive immediacy that
Yeah.
these devices and the digital dependence creates in us. So we don't have the tolerance to think things through. We're looking at short term, immediate decisions
Exactly.
versus long term decision and planning. And
Mm.
again, the prefrontal cortex and the executive functioning is the last to develop over time, right? We develop from our primitive brain here forward. And so this is the most significant part of our brain. So it's the last to grow and develop. And
Right.
that's where planning, organizing, consequences of our decisions. And so when we kind of circumvent that and we take the shortcut with these devices, we train our brain again to do short-term decision making, impulsive decision making, and we don't have the capacity to kind of think it through. And
Right.
this is natural with young people, right? This is where they're naturally at. Anyways, right? There's this invincibility in them. There's
Mm-hmm.
notion of it's not going to happen to me, that I'm different, no one in the world understands.
Yes.
So it's complicated even more developmentally, right? And then when we circumvent our brain and train our brain with all of this digital dependency.
I took some notes here
Okay.
from some of the points you did make. And one thing that is for sure, as someone who works on the recovery side of this,
Okay.
short-term goals is one of the top tools that I try to enforce because there's no ability to delay. There's just, trigger action, trigger action. And so I agree with everything you said. And I wanted you to, if you could give a little bit of talk around the relationship that people are actually developing with these devices and with the engagements that they're replacing interpersonal relationships, because again, there's where I can get that immediate feeling I'm looking for. Maybe there's less people I can get it from because I've began to isolate, but there is a relationship that is developing there as a result of the behaviors.
100%. And that really is a probably one of the most significant points to make is that in these circumstances, self-worth becomes contingent on external reward
Mm,
and external validation, likes, wins.
mm,
Um, um, it's the quality of the relationships are. I'm not saying you can't have real relationships because we all are
right.
online all the time. I'm not saying that, but there is something to relating with people you know and friendships that already have been established and then
Yeah.
using the tools versus meeting strangers and you never meet them. You don't know them outside of the screen. You don't know them in totality. Um, I think that can be a dangerous situation. We really don't even know who we're talking to, right? If we really
Yeah.
know them. And there's a false sense of connection. And like you said, there's more isolation, your world gets smaller, even though it's quite interesting, right? Because you have access to the entire world,
Yeah.
right? You do.
Yeah.
But the real relationships, the real sense of self-worth, the authentic connections are really reduced in this environment. And
Yes.
we can't, I mean, we can't build our sense of self-worth on such a fragile foundation, right?
Right.
Because if we're hoping that everybody gives us likes and everybody validates what we say and
Hmm.
everybody shows up for us, I mean, that is a false narrative. That
Yes.
that's not life. Because some days nobody's going to be there saying you did a good job. Some days
Right.
somebody's going to actually say, I don't like what you did. You know, they're going to give you
Exactly.
down, right?
Oh my gosh. Could you imagine someone getting a thumbs down if they created that into so that would be harmful.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's not real. And if we're constantly set up to look for all of this external validation, I mean,
Mhm.
I think that's when we really get into trouble. It lends to anxiety,
Mm.
depression, addiction, just utter isolation and loss. And I just think it's such a false narrative because it's not
Yeah.
reality. And
It's nowhere near the real world. The real world, we have to encounter things that we have to overcome and go through. And not having those tools and having access to these other avenues, that's where it just gets so risky, so dangerous. And that's what leads people to things like ideation when they're deep into these games and they're not getting what they need from it because they're losing, losing, losing and chasing, chasing, and chasing.
absolutely, 1,000%. And you really lose perspective. You
Yeah.
really lose perspective because you're not interacting with the world. You're not saying, oh, other things are worse or other things are better or there's another way to interact or I can really feel good when maybe I serve somebody else. I'm
Mm.
kind to someone else.
Yes.
I see someone's face light up. I connect with them physically by a touch, or all of those things are lost in
Yeah.
this kind of isolative world, and it really becomes a danger zone, and it lends to secrecy.
Hmm.
And we all know what
Yeah.
happens when we do things in the dark.
They come out, and that damages relationships. That it breaks trust.
Mhm.
It causes every part of this has a different variety of ways damage is caused.
It really does. It really does. And, I think another really important piece of this is just distress tolerance, right?
Mm.
Being able to sit still when you're bored,